I imagine you're just a little bit curious as to why I have this rather large pillow with me right now, and it's going to be very clear in a moment. But first, I want to share this. When things get tense in a conversation, when there's a disagreement, the way you say something can decide whether a difficult conversation ends in frustrated silence or in progress. And that's why in English, we often use very subtle structures or phrases that create a kind of emotional cushion, phrases that soften your message and help your ideas land with clarity. One of the most powerful ways to do that in English is with the single word were, as in, if I were in your situation, or I wish it were that simple. Suppose we were to try another option. These examples come from what's called the subjunctive mood in English, and you might have learned this as part of conditional grammar in English. For example, when I say, if I were you, I would. And we do this not because we're talking about real life, but because we're talking about what if. And these phrases aren't just grammar patterns we ask you to memorize from a textbook, they're how English speakers create psychological distance. Again, they're how we soften disagreement, and they help us keep conversations productive, even when opinions differ. So today I want to share 5 were phrases that will help you express your ideas clearly and still be thoughtful, respectful, and professional in English. Now, before we get into these 5 phrases, I want to take a little step back. I want to talk about what it means to create psychological distance in a conversation and why it's important. Psychological distance means using language that helps us depersonalize or downplay personal connection and emotional involvement, but still gives the opportunity to express what we need or want to say, even if it's uncomfortable. For example, in a high stakes conversation like meetings or job interviews, or even giving a team member difficult feedback, how you say something is just as important as what you say. If your words feel too direct, they can sound like criticism. If you hesitate or soften too much, the message might get ignored. And these were phrases help you find that middle ground. They create space so your opinion doesn't feel like pressure. They give your listener time to hear your ideas without reacting right away. And they show that you're thinking carefully, not just responding instantly out of emotion. Now, truthfully, English speakers often use these without even realizing it, especially when they want to sound respectful, professional, and in control. So, by learning these same phrases, what are they going to actually help you do in an English conversation? These phrases are going to give you language you can trust when you need to express disagreement without sounding rude, offer feedback or advice without pressure, share preferences without creating tension, and keep your relationship strong, even when opinions differ. That's exactly what we're going to focus on next with 5 powerful were structures that help you do all of this in clear, confident English. So, our first phrase for today is if I were to. This is your go to phrase when you want to offer a possibility without making it sound like a firm decision or demand. It adds an extra layer of thoughtfulness, and it shows that you're considering an idea, not pushing it on others. That makes it especially useful in job interviews, negotiations, or strategy discussions. Really, any situation where you want to sound confident, but not overconfident. So let's look at how this works. I might say, if I were to join the project, my first priority would be understanding your current challenges. Here, you're not saying, I will do this, done. You're saying, here's what I would do if this were a real situation. It's thoughtful, it's strategic, and it gives people room to think about what you're saying and then respond. Here's another example. If I were to recommend a solution, it would be to address both efficiency and cost. This phrase, if I were to, lets you share your ideas clearly without sounding like you're forcing them on others. And with that, let's move on to phrase number 2. If I were in your situation. This phrase is all about empathy. It's useful when someone is facing a tough decision, for example, and you want to offer advice, but without sounding like you know better or that you're telling them exactly what to do. And here's how it sounds in action. I want you to imagine a coworker is feeling pressured to say yes to a new project, but you can tell they're already at capacity. They are overwhelmed. So, in a conversation with them, you might say, if I were in your situation, I'd ask for more details before committing to the deadline. In this situation, you're not judging and you're not dismissing their decision. You're showing that you've thought about it from their point of view. Here's another example. In this one, let's say that your sister is thinking about switching careers from design to marketing, and you want to help her make a smart decision. So you could say, if I were in your situation, I might start with a course or certification just to test the waters. This phrase lets you offer real advice without putting pressure on the person receiving it. And now, here's a quick challenge I have for you before we move on to phrase 3. I want you to think about someone in your life. It might be a team member, a friend, or a family member, someone who's facing a tough choice right now. What advice would you want to give them in that situation? Once you have your piece of advice ready, try starting that thought with, if I were in your situation. It might seem like a very small shift, but it is softer, clearer, and more professional. Now, as always, if you want to share your example with me, you can do that in the comments below. And now, phrase number 3, I wish it were. This is one I really like. It's subtle but powerful because it helps you acknowledge reality, express a limitation, or even gently disagree without shutting down the conversation or sounding negative. And here's how it works. Let's say that your team wants to speed up a launch date, but you know quality testing needs more time. So, in a conversation, you might say, I wish it were possible to deliver by Friday, but quality requires proper testing time. In this case, you're showing that you understand the ultimate goal, but you're also clearly communicating the constraint. No defensiveness, no conflict, just facts delivered respectfully. Now, here's one more example. Let's say a colleague suggests replacing a feature in your app that's not quite working. It's a good idea, but you know it isn't realistic right now. So you could say, I wish it were easy to add a new feature like that, but that would require a full update and could break existing functionality. As you can see, this pattern softens the no. It helps you show understanding and helps you establish boundaries all in the same sentence. And now, moving on to phrase number 4, suppose we were. This phrase is an excellent way to open up ideas without sounding like you're forcing someone to go or forcing your team to go in a specific direction. Instead, it invites collaboration. It says, let's explore this together, not here's what we should do. And that's why it's perfect for brainstorming, strategy sessions, or moments where you want to reframe a stuck, frustrated conversation. For example, let's say you're in a meeting about redesigning your company's app. Progress has stalled or stopped, and the team's not really sure what to do next. In that moment, you could say, suppose we were starting from scratch. What could we design differently? This phrase, it takes the pressure off. It encourages new thinking without judging what's already been done. And now let's take a look at one more way to use this. Maybe your company is considering expanding into a new market. In that conversation, you could ask, suppose we were to enter the South Asian market. What partnerships would we need? Here, you're not making a demand, you're inviting others to think strategically with you. And that's what this phrase does. It opens doors without pushing people through them. And now, phrase number 5, I'd rather it were. This phrase lets you express clear preference without sounding demanding, difficult, or resistant. And it's especially useful when you disagree with a plan, but still want to show flexibility and respect. But I want to stop here for a moment because the truth is, if you stop after sharing your preference, this phrase can actually sound quite vague or even a little cold. And I want to demonstrate what I mean. You could say in a conversation that I'd rather the timeline were a bit longer. Here you're showing your preference, and it's not rude, but it also doesn't invite any discussion or show that you have some flexibility. And so now let's compare that to this. I'd rather the timeline were a bit longer, but I understand the urgency and I'm willing to adjust. Suddenly, it's not just a preference, it's a productive professional response. Now, here's another example. Let's say your team wants a big product launch right away, but you're not convinced that it's the right move. So, in that conversation, you could say, I'd rather it were a smaller initial rollout, but I see the benefits of going company wide. That second part, where we show that flexibility, that's where the magic happens. It shows that you're open to other perspectives and it helps keep the collaboration on track, even when there are different sides or different opinions. So, whenever you use this last pattern, this last phrase, remember that it's not just about what you prefer, it's also how you communicate it with honesty and flexibility. So now let's put all of this into practice. Let's say that someone on your team is proposing something that you're not fully on board with. Maybe it's a new deadline, a new system, or a change in a process. In that conversation, how would you respond using the structure, I'd rather it were, but I understand? Or I'd rather it were, and I'm open to. Try it out loud, write it down, and say it aloud. And if you want more strategies just like this, so that you can speak up with confidence in English conversations, you can find all of that and more over at speakconfidentenglish.com. That's where you'll also find my in depth English fluency training called How to Get the Confidence to Say What You Want in English. With that, thank you so much for joining me today. And as always, if you found this lesson helpful to you, I would love for you to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening or watching from today. You can also share it with someone you know who needs it. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you next time.